Thanks for joining us. And today we're going to talk about Kriya Yoga modifications, good or bad. So Kriya Yoga modifications, what we're talking about here is the modification of the Kriya techniques from their original form. So the original form being those that were taught by Lahiri Baba, Lahiri Mahashai. Now there's a recognition that Lahiri Baba likely taught a customized approach to at least some of his students. So saying that there is an original Kriya is a bit of a misnomer. But what we do have is the 7 steps in Kriya, the 7 chapters or 7 initiations that he actually taught to his preeminent disciple, Panchanan Bhattacharya. So Lahiri provided those, and that's the lineage that I follow and the lineage in which I teach. Now, not saying that that is the original Kriya necessarily, but it's pretty close to the teachings that Lahiri originally taught to his students. So some particular Kriya schools have made minor modifications to the Kriya practice, and others have made major modifications to the Kriya practice. So for instance, Yogananda of Self-Realization Fellowship made some fairly substantive changes to the way that Kriya was taught. And part of that was to adapt them to Western or American students who were having challenges with many of the what were considered traditional Kriya practices at the time. For example, Khechari Mudra, right, which involves taking the tongue and sticking it into the nasal pharynx as part of the Kriya practice. So when Yogananda taught Kriya to American students, they were likely bewildered by things like Khechari Mudra, and so he made some modifications to the Kriya technique. And other teachers, such as Hariharananda, made additional modifications that really changed the way that Kriya was taught in the practices. As well, there are some Kriya Yoga schools that have incorporated Hatha Yoga into Kriya Yoga, and as a result, the practices they teach have more to do with Hatha Yoga than Kriya Yoga. For example, the 144 Kriyas of Babaji. And there are other schools as well that claim that they were directly taught by Babaji without the intermediary of Lahiri Baba or anyone who followed in different lineages of Kriya, and saying that they received the Kriya Yoga teachings directly from Babaji. The fact that people believe that really speaks to sort of a gullibility among some students that just want to believe virtually anything, and the mythologizing of Kriya Yoga lineages, right? So it's a kind of a spiritual fantasy that you get to act that out. Well, in this day and age, 2023, you were taught directly by Babaji, I want to learn from you, and then I can go off to the Himalayas and join Babaji and his band. So when we're looking at Kriya and thinking about modifications, there are 2 things that are important to me. One of them is, are the modifications that are made effective, right? Are they actually helping the student to attain the goal? Now, the immediate goal in Kriya Yoga is pratyahara, right? Internalization. Kriya Yoga is a very concise practice for getting into pratyahara, right? And so when you get that internalization, Kriya can help you to get into that. So are the modifications that are being taught allowing that to happen? Now, in the case of Yogananda, part of his adaptation, if you will, is removal of Khechari Mudra, right, which was likely bewildering, as I said, for his American and other students, and the incorporation of a mouth-breathing Kriya, right? And so there have been some in the Kriya community that have, criticized Yogananda extensively, basically suggesting that his Kriya is like an abomination, right? That his Kriya is terrible. And I don't think that's necessarily the case, but from my perspective, it's not as effective as the original Kriya, adding the mouth breathing. Now, with the mouth breathing Kriya, he made some additional modifications in there that involve Ujjayi breath and involving the use of a visualized tube within that's reminiscent of the Sushumna Nadi. And so the thing is about those modifications is that I think they were probably originally well intended to help to adapt to the Western students, The challenge is that they made Kriya more difficult. So in this case, with that mouth-breathing pranayama that was taught by Yogananda, I would say the modification is not as effective as the original form, and consequently, the students are not getting the same benefit as if they had learned the original or close to original Kriya. Now, that being said, if Yogananda had not come to America and spread the Kriya teachings in his modified version of Kriya, probably people in the West would know nothing about it. So we have to give him credit where it's deserved. Now, just as a side note, I want to talk very briefly about mouth-breathing pranayama. Now, mouth-breathing pranayama is used in Hatha yoga and other types of yoga, and in some Kriya yoga schools. There was a student who asked me, is there anything wrong with mouth-breathing pranayama? Well, there's nothing really wrong with it, but there are particular types of mouth-breathing pranayama that are not appropriate for meditation. For instance, there is the Kapalabhati yogic breath, right? This fire breathing. It's also been popularized by Wim Hof as Wim Hof breathing, right? Basically, it's hyperventilation, this kind of breath, right? So when that is taught in yoga, often what they will do is they stick out their tongue and then they curl their tongue. Now, I can't curl my tongue because it's actually a genetic trait, right? It's not something you can learn. You can either curl your tongue or you can't. They will breathe in and out through the whole of their tongue. So the fact that Kapalabhati is not really effective for meditation because it stimulates your sympathetic nervous system, right? Stimulates your adrenal glands, right? And what they call the fire breath, right? It's really great for keeping yourself warm in an environment where you are close to freezing, right? So it can be effective for that, but it burns up energy reserves, the energy in your kidneys. And in Chinese medicine and Taoist internal alchemy, we talk about the kidneys as basically being the battery of the body. So when you're using that fire breath, you're actually drawing from the battery of the body, the kidneys and the adrenals. You're burning up your energy reserve, basically. Now, that's okay for short-term stuff that you're doing, right? But if you do that as a regular long-term practice, it will affect your energy level. It will basically burn up your energy reserves. And consequently, you'll have low energy, you'll have less energy for meditation, less energy for things in your life. So I do not support the regular practice of that kind of technique. And definitely it is not effective before meditation. Now, if we are looking at modifications, as I said, you really have to understand how Kriya Yoga works, right? So a lot of people have a vested interest in their lineage and saying that my lineage is pure or whatever, and having these sort of Kriya wars, right? And casting aspersions on others and that kind of thing. I don't think that's very productive. But what is helpful is to do an objective evaluation of that modification in Kriya. As I said, is it effective? Does it help you to get into pratyahara, right? Into internalization. So the work of Forrest Knudsen, who is a Kriya Yoga guru in the Panchanan-Bhattacharya lineage of Kriya Yoga, has really demystified Kriya and looking at it in terms of being informed by neuroscience. How does the Kriya pranayama affect your ability to get into internalization, into pratyahara? Now, we know from the work of Forrest, right, and he's built on lots of other people like the work of Dr. Stephen Porges and so on, that when you have a long out breath, that this actually stimulates the dorsal vagal complex, which is a nerve that runs along the anterior part of your spine, right? And when that is stimulated or activated, it sends a signal to the medulla in the brainstem, right? What we sometimes call the Ajna chakra. And then it actually slows down your heart rate, right? It's a physiological response to stimulating the dorsal vagal complex with a long exhalation, a long, slow exhalation, right? So bringing your breath below that 7 breaths per minute threshold, stimulating the dorsal vagal complex with an extended exhalation, then helps to send the signal to the medulla, bring down the heart rate. The heart and the breath get into resonance with each other, and you get into pratyahara, right? So if we're looking at Kriya Yoga modifications, do they allow that process to unfold within you? Are they supporting you to stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system to bring you into a low idle state, into a pratyahara state? If they're not doing it, there's a challenge with that, right? And the sort of secondary goal in Kriya Yoga is the tranquil breath, what is often called erroneously the breathless state, right? Where your breath shallows out, becomes very, very shallow and very soft, and then seems to disappear. You're still breathing, but it seems to disappear. And what happens is that you are drawn within. you become very internalized and you get into deeper states of meditation, right? So that the onset of the tranquil breath is something that Lahiri Baba talked about, very much and advocated that folks, when they're doing their Kriya Yoga practice, they want to aim for the tranquil breath, and then they're drawn into a meditative experience, basically, right? They have this pratyahara and they have the tranquil breath, and then things start to unfold, deeper states in meditation. Dharana, sort of concentration on an internalized void. Dhyana, which is the absorption in your spiritual experiences, and then samadhi, where you become one with those experiences, right? So that comes from Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, the 6th, 7th, and 8th steps, if you will, or rungs on the Ashtanga wheel, right? So if we want to evaluate modifications, we need to understand how Kriya Yoga works and then have a way to look at those modifications. Say, are they useful or are they not? Now, the other thing that's important to me is that if you are going to make modifications to Kriya, you want to give the students an option to use it or not. So at Modern Kriya, we provide the full set of the original teachings as taught in the Panchananda lineage of Kriya Yoga. And then we give additional practices as options for students to pursue. So they have an informed consent, right? So they're not just learning a modification, not knowing that it's a modification, but actually knowing what the original Kriya teachings are, understanding how they work, right? Especially on the parasympathetic nervous system, right? Which is responsible for pratyahara, the freeze response, right? And also leveraging modern understandings in neuroscience, which link the central nervous system, the parasympathetic and the sympathetic, with the brain, with the brain waves, with the integration of the left and right hemispheres of the brain. So if we're looking at modifications in Kriya Yoga, it's not really about which Kriya Yoga school is pure or which practices are pure, but how we can best understand Kriya Yoga to support our students in their spiritual development. So if you have any questions about this video, feel free to send me an email at info@modernkriya.com. Also check our website at modernkriya.com and our YouTube channel. So thanks for joining us, and we will see you next time.